What brings you to air support?
Kind of like the idea of it. No guns, no kicking in doors, just quiet.
Oh, yeah.
For Frank Murphy, policing the air has its ups.
Welcome to air support.
And downs.
You got a runaway.
Well, I just wanted to say, sir, that was my fault. I talked Murphy into taking us there.
You're supposed to be stupid, son. Don't abuse the privilege.
Roy Scheider is Frank Murphy, a lone wolf.
Freeze! Bozo, how many regulars come in the front door with a key?
Who's about to become a guinea pig.
I thought it was illegal to arm police helicopters.
Well, that would depend on the circumstances, wouldn't it?
Columbia Pictures presents Blue Thunder, a flying arsenal that hears through walls, sees in the dark, and thinks your thoughts.
Wherever you look, the guns follow.
It was designed for war-torn countries.
One civilian dead for every 10 terrorists. That's an acceptable ratio, unless you're one of the civilians.
It was assigned to American cities.
You talking about crowd control from the air?
That's what this special detail is all about.
They told Murphy to test it. They didn't tell him what it was for.
A dozen of these copters and you can run the whole damn country.
Who was behind it?
Where are we?
Federal building.
Really? Hey, you want to find out what's going on in there?
Certainly do.
Wait, you gotta do me a favor. I want you to pick up a package for me.
Why they chose him.
He's totally unsuitable for our purpose.
Don't stop for anything or anybody.
For why they changed their minds.
Turn the face over, go on 5. I never saw this guy before in my life. Come on, let's go.
Well, not so fast. That's government property. Give me that.
But when Murphy went looking for answers,
Got all this on tape?
I got every word of it.
Gets back to me, I'll deny it.
the answer came looking for him. They had the ultimate weapon and the perfect plan, but Murphy stole their thunder.
We're coming right up on 1984, the year of George Orwell's famous book about Big Brother. And this movie explores, in a very entertaining, populist kind of way, Big Brother and invasion of privacy.
We knew that this was that the technical aspect of the film, the capability of the helicopter to really spy on people, existed because we were doing it.
I had done Saturday Night Fever, and then for a complete change of pace, gone to England to do Dracula with Frank Langella. And while I was in England, I got very interested in a play that was running there on the East End called Whose Life Is It Anyway? And managed to get MGM to buy the rights to it, and we got Richard Dreyfuss to star in it. So I had been working on that when Blue Thunder came along to me in the form of a script by Dan O'Bannon and Don Jakoby.
This was just after Alien was made. And Don and I had been friends since film school. So we're sitting around, and Alien's in the theaters, and we talked about doing something together on spec. Now, I was ill at the time. I was pretty ill. I'd come down with Crohn's disease. So writing was difficult, but I had a good advantage with Alien just having opened for my name. So Don and I agreed to do a script together on spec, and that he would do most of the writing, but I would put my name first. And these were all for practical reasons. I recall, at the time we were talking, there was one of those very intrusive LAPD helicopters was going around overhead. And I remember we got to talking about a taxi driver. I said, hey, how about an LAPD helicopter pilot that goes crazy and shoots up the city? Don starts turning out pages, and they were really magnificent. I mean, it went a good deal beyond, what we originally had in mind.
When this came along, it was just great fun. And also there was a serious theme underneath, which I thought was very intriguing. All the characters in here who are involved in this huge kind of underground government conspiracy for various political purposes, I found very interesting as they're grappling with this guy who's just there to, test a helicopter.
They liked that third act with all of the helicopters shooting up L.A., but they didn't like the rest of the script because the main character, Murphy, was psychotic. And they didn't feel like spending top action movie budget with a crazy hero. It seemed to them non-commercial.
The character of Murphy is a kind of tragedy of the Vietnam War. A character with post-traumatic stress syndrome, which was a term that was not thrown around very much at that time. But, what do you do with these guys that we've trained to be, murderers and killers and so on, all in the name of protecting America? But when you throw them back into the mix, and what happens with that brain that's been scrambled in combat and so on, I think that he conceived of Murphy in a much darker way, a much more disturbed person than finally eventually came out, and is really borderline psychotic. And my feeling was that for the kind of movie that we wanted to make, we wanted to just bring him a little bit closer to us, not quite so far out.
Once you make him sane, then in order to justify his actions in the end requires a pretty complicated, circuitous plot, which is what we ended up with. Turned it into more like your standard Watergate thriller, right? The sort of formless paranoia of big government, out of which you can spit all kinds of half-explained scenes.
We went to the best source that we had, which was the Los Angeles Helicopter Division. And they were extremely helpful and cooperative. They were delighted that somebody was paying attention to them, and they understood it to be a fictional piece. So as long as we didn't call it the Los Angeles Helicopter Division, but something generic like the Metro Division or something like that, they were terrific.
Police cooperation was very necessary to do a picture like this. And so it didn't take very long before we went through the script and, obliterated stuff that they might get huffy about.
They took us on helicopter rides at night with the pilots and the observers, and we could see what's going on. And a lot of the incidents in the film, in the early part of the film especially, come right from those rides.
We actually reversed the polarity on our prejudices, and we brought in some feds and made them evil feds and made good LAPD.
The first time I heard about the film was through John Badham, who was in preparation to do it. And I don't know whether he called my agent or he called me first, but we arranged a meeting and we discussed the film. And then I saw a script.
Roy Scheider was always connected with this from the get-go, and it wasn't very long after Jaws that he was brought into this as the kind of movie star that was right for this, somebody that people liked.
I played a lot of cops, but they were all different. I mean, there's a different cop in Jaws, there's a different cop in French Connection, there's a different cop in Blue Thunder. They come from a different state, a different civilization, a different style.
Somebody that was hot and young and had a great vitality and energy and an intensity that Scheider brings to things.
I mean, what I try to bring to anything that I do is some kind of sense of realism. I mean, I have to really believe that this could really happen. We decided that he was a kind of a maverick guy, and would certainly go off on his own and do certain things that policemen weren't supposed to do. But that film was made in a time when policemen who did things like that, they were admired.
You wanted a character who is new to the helicopter business, who's coming in new, who's learning about it, and who has this kind of openness to everything. I had seen Danny Stern in Breaking Away and really loved his performance and that kind of big open-eyed innocence.
From the moment we laid eyes on him and he started giving lines, I said, damn. I said, it is Lyman Goody. It was that way with a number of characters.
I had remembered Candy Clark from American Graffiti, that I was delighted to find that she was going to be on this film.
And had that just kind of wonderful, slightly ditzy, nutsy kind of thing about her. She brought that quality to the whole movie.
I had named him Braddock, but before they started shooting, somebody figured out that it sounded like Buttock, and so they unfortunately changed him to Braddock.
I've always been such a huge fan of Warren Oates. I mean, he's just the most wonderful quality of an actor who brings a personality unlike anybody else.
He read lines that you and I could not read like that. He had his own pronunciation, he had his own rhythm, and many a time I think I spoiled scenes by just laughing. He just cracked me up.
Well, he didn't change it, he just made it his own and gave it, his own kind of wry quality that he has. And, that's what we wanted and that's what we got. He passed away about a month after we finished shooting, and I think his heart just kind of gave out. Everybody was so in love with him and felt so bad about it that the movie is dedicated at the very end to Warren.
Now, the Malcolm McDowell character wasn't in the original draft because it didn't need a villain. But in order to, have a functioning dynamic when you made Murphy good, Don sat down and dutifully invented the character of Cochran.
I always liked to cast in slightly off-center ways, and I had a particular affection for an Australian actor named Brian Brown. He had promised a friend of his that he would do a low-budget movie for them at the same time, and so he said, I just can't do it. And the next thing I came up with was Malcolm McDowell.
When they cast Malcolm McDowell, and when he walked out there with that haircut and that jumpsuit, started talking, well, Don and my reaction was identical. I said, well, we didn't imagine him as English, but other than that, he's walked off of the page.
There is that kind of nastiness to him that he does so well, so that he would be a great foil for Murphy, and have a totally different kind of characterization and something that we'd love to hate. Philip Harrison, the production designer, and I decided early on we needed to extensively storyboard all the flight sequences, the helicopter sequences, and the action sequences. We didn't need to storyboard dialogue sequences because that's a waste of time. But to do it there with the action sequences and the flight sequences is really good because then everybody knows what you're after.
Because of the complexity of planning, where if you've got helicopters and all this and you're shooting back down onto the ground, where do you put the unit? Where do you hide stuff? All the huge trucks and everything have got to be further away than all that sort of thing had to be figured out. And the only way to do it was for me to provide a sort of totally laid out diagram of the entire film, because basically we're going to be using so many natural, normal city locations in LA that you couldn't go too far away from this look of reality, the sort of current, near future look, but not unrealistic. It's coherent as a design piece, even though we stretched a bit with a helicopter.
I basically tried to write something that was too difficult and expensive to shoot. I mean, the idea of actually doing helicopter combat over Los Angeles, I thought, was a fundamentally impractical possible idea. This was before before Top Gun, you know. Well, joke's on me, right? That was probably the easiest thing they did in that picture. Before I knew it, they were up there flying around fancy helicopters over downtown LA and popping up blanks at each other.
Flying with Jim Gavin was a real treat because Jim would teach you while you're sitting in the seat next to him. And first thing you know, you'd have the stick in your hand and you'd be steering the helicopter, and then he'd have you have the collective, which is basically the accelerator. And Roy got to the part where he could actually work the pedals. And that's what's steering the helicopter a lot.
I had been in the Air Force for 3 years. I had soloed in Texas. I eventually washed out because I'm a lousy mathematician and I couldn't do the navigation. So I had some familiarity with aircraft. The actual helicopter pilot was behind me and to the side. But when we took off or we came in, I had been playing with that, the joystick a lot. So I was getting used to the feel of this thing, and sometimes they would let me land it and let me take it off. But then once we got up, they said no.
They're all ex-Vietnam guys, they're all hardened, sort of combat-hardened pilots, they're pretty hot stuff.
I had the chance to look at the dailies occasionally, what was shot, and I would see shots of Malcolm sitting in the helicopter as well. And while the film was rolling, he would look very staunch and very mean-looking, and then as soon as the director yelled, "cut," he would sort of go pale, and you'd see his head go down like this. He would disappear out of the frame. And so one day I said to him, "What's going on with you? What happens when you disappear out of frame?" He says, "I have to put my head between my legs because I'm so sick."
His agent had made a deal with Columbia Pictures that he did not have to fly in the helicopter because he was terrified of flying. But he got to the set and he saw Roy Scheider getting in the helicopter. He saw Danny Stern getting in the helicopter, so he was embarrassed to say that he wouldn't, and he did it. And I'm certainly glad I didn't know. And it actually helped him get over a lot of his fear of flying, the work that we did in there, though it terrified him.
I said, "Well, why did you take this part?" He said, "Well, it's a great part, isn't it?"
You have so many people that are involved that you literally have to have a meeting with everybody there and say, "Okay, this is what we're doing today. You're going to fly the helicopter such and such a way. You're going to drive these cars and do this." Everybody has to understand what their job is in the overall picture and how it relates, and you can't rush it.
John was a perfect guy to direct this movie. He really was excited about the relationship of these machines to people, to the ground, to the air. He really got it.
The whole picture was exciting. Even the dialogue scenes were electric because there was so much going on behind the scene that was happening that it almost was a wall-to-wall action movie. Invariably, there were 6 cameras photographing aerial action, and then they added stuff later with close-ups and guys flying them.
When we got to shooting the actors in the helicopter for close-ups for all of this very dangerous stuff at the end, that was where we came down to Columbia saying to us, "Do this stuff on the ground first. Make sure you have close-ups first. They won't be visually as good as what you want to get, but God forbid something happens." So we literally put the helicopter up on a 6-foot platform and got everybody's close-up. And then we were allowed to, take them out and do it in the actual streets. And the advantage of doing it in the actual streets is phenomenal because you start to get the reflections of the buildings passing on the bubble in front of them, and you really feel that you're there. Things are streaking by you, and it's so much more dynamic and alive. One particular day, I said, "Let's get a shot up in the helicopter of Roy flying it," and the way we would do it is we'd put Roy Scheider on the right-hand seat, and the actual pilot, Jim Gavin, would be in the left-hand seat, And Frank Holgate, the second unit cameraman, would stand outside on the skids of the helicopter, strapped on with a little homemade device that he made with clips and straps and all of this stuff, hooking right onto the helicopter. We take off and we get it lined up, and Jim's flying it just the way Frank is saying, okay, here. And I look at Frank Holgate, and he's standing there. His skin is getting whiter and whiter and whiter, and this look of pure terror. What's happening is this whole rig, the straps are starting to come undone. And he was just going to drop off and fall back into the sky. And Jim already had seen him and was pulling the little window of the door open. And he reached out through it and wrapped his arm around Holgate. So the next thing, there's this awkward thrusting of the camera back to me to get rid of the damn thing. And I thought, well, I got some footage here. So I put the camera up and I started to shoot Roy actually flying the helicopter. We could now take our cameras out and do things that we hadn't been able to do before because the cameras were just too big, too heavy, too clunky, and you couldn't have this kind of beginning of guerrilla filmmaking that now we sort of take for granted. John Lanzo is one of the most adventurous cameramen that anybody has ever seen. I mean, he came up as a poor kid from Mexico with nothing and not speaking English or anything like that, and climbed to the very top of the heap of cinematographers in the world. And he did it by taking great chances and having a boldness and a braveness with film and photography that other cameramen would not touch. We always wanted to have a shot that would, show this helicopter off to the best advantage. And after a lot of experimentation, we found that it looked the best when you shot it kind of head on and with a really long telescopic lens, because that has the effect of kind of flattening it out and making it look more frightening. It has tremendous power, and I wish I had used it, a couple of times more in the picture because it was so effective. Everybody thinks that we used rubber chickens. Well, we didn't use rubber chickens. Rubber chickens cost $10 a piece. If you go to Ralph's and you pick up barbecued chickens, they're $2.50. We had these big cranes in there, 200-foot cranes, that had like hoppers in them. And when the trigger was pulled, these hoppers would open up and dump thousands of chickens down on the ground for the key moment. Everybody's worried that this is going to happen too soon. So I'm the guy who's got this white flag that I'm supposed to wave so nobody can make the mistake but me. I give the signal for the explosion happens down on the ground of all the barbecue shack and the vans outside flipping over.
It literally melted the front of our mat box.
We have chickens flying everywhere. They drop all over the place. And the cars, you can actually see, there's a Volkswagen and a police car, and they're skidding through chicken fat. And we go out there because we have got to clean this all up before we go, and suddenly homeless guys come out of everywhere, and they're helping us with the, clean up the chickens. In 1981, 1982, the state of the art of special effects, visual special effects, was pretty primitive. Star Wars had helped advance the art quite a bit, and taking advantage of what's called motion control photography, we were able to get this little fledgling company that was literally working in a garage in Culver City that were really good with special effects.
We were a small shop, and we didn't have access to like optical printing, and we didn't have a model shop and things like that. So we were working with associates and friends of ours that would build the different pieces. And because it was a relatively simplistic request, a simple F-16, there were available high-quality models that were off the shelf.
They would take little model planes that were no bigger than this and set them on a stick against a black background and now shoot them with a camera that was moving, and it would make the plane look like it was moving because against black all you saw was this shape coming toward us. We'd go out with cameras and we'd shoot, what would be the background flying through, and now we put this nice little plane, lay it in there, and the trick is to do it so you don't see all the edges.
And I think to me in these kind of movies that's very important, that you kind of blend in and just help communicate the story. There was an 80-foot tall miniature, which is really not a miniature at that size, it's a maxiture, but it was nonetheless the copy of the Arco Towers.
The building had to be 1/10 size, and the buildings were 700 feet tall. And you had to look like you were shooting up from the street, one of the shots, at a 700-foot tall building. So we finished the top 40 feet of the building and left the scaffolding on the lower half, which was out of the frame because the unfinished part was where my hand is and the available finished part was up here.
And the idea was, as you saw in the movie, the helicopter flies by as the missile strikes and there's a huge explosion blowing out the building as the Blue Thunder continues on through. Well, to facilitate that required the use of the RC helicopter. We had about 8 cameras, in the Columbia lot, which is where we were shooting this, pointed toward the sky. One camera in particular was a close-up that was a shot which showed the helicopter squeaking through frame as the explosion was going off.
One of the tricks of shooting miniatures, you have to shoot a lot of slow motion. And then that makes something really tiny look a lot bigger and grander than it really is. We wanted to tie full-size Murphy into full-size train. And it was easier to use a full-size train. That meant we had to build a full-size balsa wood helicopter.
Was done to the exact configuration of the real one, the flying model. And but it was only one take. Take 2 would have been a few weeks down the line, and those things are only one take, and so it took a good while to set it up.
And it's got gasoline and all kinds of explosives in it. And the train company was willing to drive their train right through these explosives. They said, oh, no, it won't hurt it. You go, okay.
You end up with a certain amount of your childhood being involved. Oh boy, we're going to crash a plane, this kind of thing. I just think that comes with the job, and it's part of the peripheral benefits of the work we do.
The movie was almost 2 hours long to start with, and that's long for this type of movie.
If you get 500 people saying, I don't like this, then you can probably get rid of them. And so we pulled it down, tightened it up, and it's pretty exciting the way it is. When it was released, the critical response was mixed. Some people really liked it. They liked the action. Some people thought it was baloney. And so we had this mixed bag, but our audiences were really good, and the audiences went for it and liked it.
It was released improperly. It never got the proper release. I think it grossed about $50 million at that time.
I was really impressed. I love the action, I mean, in today's world, you think it's kind of almost far-fetched, in some ways that a lot of these things that were kind of very science fiction are now actually come to pass, which is kind of eerie,
We often wondered how much of this technology was actually being used by the government or by any local agency to spy on people. And the same kind of anxiety exists today.
Right immediately after 9/11, I doubt if something like Blue Thunder would have been palatable to a lot of people.
When they tell you there's an evil weapon, you always want to see it used.
I doubt that they would have written it this way, let alone shot it this way. They probably would have made adjustments for it right after 9/11, but today I think it would be tame in today's world.
The film has this wonderful build to it. You don't expect it to go as big as it does, but it keeps you entertained until you get to that point. And when it opens up, boy, that third act, I haven't been able to repeat that.
The best sign that you're doing well is that people start to rip you off, and which is what happened with Airwolf. And Columbia ripped itself off with making a television series called Blue Thunder.
You could make a Blue Thunder today, and the audience would be there to see it because the same problems about privacy exist.
It's such a powerful image. It suggests such a dominant, all-seeing, presence. And I think that sort of is its little secret.
It was so much fun to work with, and it's always a ball working with John. And the reward was terrific. I mean, to get an Academy Award nomination is just insane. It's great.
to do it for real was very, very hard, and it was totally exhausting. And by the end of the process, I was ready to just be carted off. But there's this, good, strong story with a great score and good performances and wonderful action. So I'm glad that I was able to, help hold it all together and make what we have.